In 1956, popular mechanics called the TV dinner the meal of tomorrow. Every piece of that promise turned out wrong. Every piece also turned out right. Here's how a frozen slab of turkey in a compartmented aluminum tray became the strangest piece of prophecy in American kitchen history. A little foil rectangle that predicted the future by failing at almost everything it claimed. Pull up a chair. This one is a good one. To understand why a TV dinner was called the future of food, you have to understand what the future looked like in 1953. It looked like chrome. It looked like atomic symbols printed on formica. It looked like a magazine cover of a smiling housewife in a crinoline skirt pulling a steaming tray out of an oven, while a little boy in a cowboy hat watched a Westinghouse television in the other room. The war was 8 years behind America. The boys had come home. The suburbs were going up in rows, raw concrete slabs and yellow pine studs multiplying across former cow pastures in Levittown and Lakewood and Park Forest. The appliance factories that had been building bomber parts 6 years earlier were now building refrigerators with freezer compartments big enough to hold a 20-pound turkey. And everywhere, on billboards, in magazine ads, in newsreels before the main feature, the word atomic was doing work it had never done before. Atomic energy, atomic medicine, atomic kitchen. General Electric ran ads for ranges called speed cooking in letters that looked like they'd been stenciled onto the side of a rocket. The bomb that ended the war was, somehow, now going to cook your pot roast. America had decided, in one of its greatest leaps of collective imagination, that the terrible thing was also going to be the wonderful thing. That the mushroom cloud and the TV dinner were siblings in the same optimistic family. That is the mood you need to remember. Not nostalgia, optimism. A specific, slightly unhinged optimism that believed the future was a product you could buy at the A&P. Here is where the story officially begins, or where the story says it begins. November 1953, Omaha, Nebraska. A company called C.A. Swanson & Sons, founded in 1899 by a Swedish immigrant named Carl Swanson Sr., and now run by his two sons, Clark Swanson and Gilbert Swanson, is sitting on a problem. The problem weighs 520,000 pounds. That is how much surplus Thanksgiving turkey the company has on its hands after the holiday rush didn't rush the way the forecasts promised. Refrigerated rail cars full of frozen birds are rolling back and forth across the Midwest because it is actually cheaper to keep them moving than to pay for frozen warehouse space. 1,000 tons of unsold turkey sloshing across America on the Union Pacific. Somebody had to figure out what to do with those turkeys. And the man who stepped forward, or who later said he stepped forward, was a Swanson salesman named Jerry Thomas. Here is where the legend gets slippery. For decades, Jerry Thomas told a lovely story. He said he'd seen a single-compartment aluminum tray used by Pan American Airways to serve hot meals on flights. He said he sketched a 3-compartment version on a piece of notebook paper while sitting on an airplane himself. He said he pitched the idea to the Swansons, and they paid him a bonus of about $1,000 and, more importantly, let him claim the invention for the rest of his life. He said it eloquently, repeatedly, charmingly, in interviews all the way up to his death in 2005. The Swanson family has a different story. Clark and Gilbert Swanson, according to their descendants, had already been working on frozen complete meals with their food scientists for months. The aluminum tray, the compartments, the branding, that was, they said, a team effort inside the company. Jerry Thomas was a salesman, a good one, a man who could sell the idea of a tray of turkey to a skeptical grocer. But the tray itself, they said, was not his invention. The truth is probably in the middle, where truths usually hide. Somebody saw an airline tray. Somebody thought about compartments. Somebody remembered the 520,000 pounds of turkey. And somebody decided to call it, this is the crucial word, a TV dinner. Because that was the genius. Not the turkey, not the tray, the name. Stop and sit with that for a moment. They could have called it a frozen complete meal. They could have called it a Swanson supper. They could have called it anything that described the food. Instead, they named it after the piece of furniture you were going to eat it in front of. They named it after the glowing box in the corner of the living room that, in 1953, was still a novelty. Only about 45% of American homes had a television. But that number was climbing. So fast, you could watch it move. A new antenna going up on a new roof every day. They didn't sell you dinner. They sold you a ritual. They sold you permission to eat in the living room. The first tray hit grocery store freezers in late 1953. It cost 98 cents. Inside was Thanksgiving on a slab, sliced turkey and gravy, cornbread stuffing, buttered peas, and whipped sweet potatoes. 3 compartments, 1 meal, heat at 425 degrees Fahrenheit for 25 minutes. Peel back the foil. Place on a small folding metal stand the TV tray that was, not coincidentally, also being sold by the thousands that same Christmas. Eat while Lucille Ball did something to Ricky Ricardo on a black and white screen the size of a hatbox. And here is the number that ended the argument. In the first full year of production, Swanson sold 10 million TV dinners. 10 million. In a country of about 160 million people. That is 1 TV dinner for every 16 Americans, including the Americans who were too young to chew turkey, and the Americans who refused on principle to eat anything out of a foil tray. It was, by any measure anyone used then or uses now, a sensation. Now, let's talk about the marketing, because this is where the story of the TV dinner stops being a story about food and starts being a story about promises. Big promises. The kind of promises only a country still flush from winning a world war feels entitled to make. Swanson's early magazine ads didn't sell turkey, they sold tomorrow. They showed the tray floating in midair, gleaming silver, with lines radiating out from it like a rocket's exhaust. They used words like modern and scientific and engineered. The copy in one 1954 ad said the meal was prepared by food technicians using the latest advances in flash freezing and thermal engineering. Food technicians, not cooks. Technicians. Men in white coats with clipboards, the same kind of men who were, in another ad on the facing page, splitting the atom. Popular Mechanics picked up the thread in 1956 with that line, "The meal of tomorrow." The magazine ran a cover illustration of a housewife in a swept-back hairdo pulling a tray from an oven with a thought bubble showing her smiling family watching rockets launch on television. The message was baked into every pixel. The same country that put a tray in your freezer was going to put a man on the moon. And you could have both. You could have the rocket and the tray. Buy one. Believe the other. Look around any 1957 or 1958 issue of Life or Look or Good Housekeeping, and you'll see the pattern repeat itself. Atomic kitchen spreads, space-age appliances, GE's Kitchen of the Future concept with pastel push-button ranges. Whirlpool was particularly bold. In 1959, Whirlpool built a Miracle Kitchen, a self-cleaning, voice-controlled, robot-assisted kitchen they shipped to Moscow for the American National Exhibition. Moscow. 1959. Remember that date, because that is the year of the kitchen debate. Vice President Richard Nixon walks through the exhibit with Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev. They stop in front of a model American kitchen. Khrushchev is skeptical. Nixon gets animated. He gestures at the dishwasher and says something like, "Don't you think it would be better to argue over the relative merits of washing machines than the relative strengths of rockets?" It becomes one of the most famous unscripted exchanges of the Cold War. And what is Nixon pointing to? Not a bomb, a kitchen. He is arguing that America is going to win the 20th century because American women don't have to scrub their dishes by hand. That the TV dinner is, in a literal sense, a piece of foreign policy. You have to stop and appreciate how strange that is. A pot pie-shaped aluminum tray became a Cold War artifact. The peas that stayed bright green through reheating, that Pantone shade of fluorescent spring that no real garden pea has ever achieved in its natural life. Those peas were, for a brief moment, a symbol of Western democracy. That's the thing about the 1950s. The bar for what counted as propaganda was remarkably low and remarkably colorful. Take a breath. Now let's talk about the foil. If you lived through the late 1950s or early 1960s, you remember the sound. That crisp, specific, metallic tear as you peeled back the lid of a TV dinner tray. The foil came off hot. You learned, usually the hard way, to grip the little folded corner and pull upward and away from your face, because a cloud of steam would rise, up carrying the smell of whatever the dinner claimed to be. Turkey, Salisbury steak, fried chicken, meatloaf, mixed with the faint metallic ghost of the aluminum itself. Some people say they can still taste that ghost when they bite into an old-style aluminum pan today. A kind of tin-bright edge, a warmth on the tongue that isn't really a flavor so much as a memory of one. Reynolds Metals Company could not have been happier. Reynolds had been making aluminum foil since 1947, when they introduced the first consumer roll of Reynolds Wrap in those familiar red and white boxes. But aluminum production was still scaling up. The war had built massive aluminum capacity for aircraft, B-17s, B-29s, and after the war, those factories needed something to make. The TV dinner was a gift. Every tray was a piece of aluminum. Every lid was more foil. By 1960, Reynolds and its competitors were running their smelters hot and heavy, pulling bauxite out of Jamaica and Suriname, refining it into aluminum, rolling it thin, stamping it into 3-compartment trays, and shipping those trays to food plants in Nebraska and Ohio and California, where they'd be filled with gravy and frozen solid and shipped back out to grocery stores across the country. The trays had a second life too. People washed them. People saved them. In the 1960s, half the kitchens in suburban America had a drawer full of clean, slightly dented trays, waiting to be repurposed as seedling planters or paint palettes. You couldn't quite throw them away. They felt too engineered, too much like a small piece of the future you'd been promised. Okay, let's follow the money. In 1955, just 2 years after the first tray hit shelves, the Campbell Soup Company bought C.A. Swanson & Sons. The sale price was about $50 million in stock, which in 1955 money was a stack taller than the Empire State Building. Campbell's saw what Swanson had. They saw 10 million trays a year and climbing. They saw a brand name that had, in 24 months, become synonymous with the future of eating. They bought it, folded it into their empire, and immediately began expanding the line. By 1957, Swanson was offering fried chicken, Salisbury steak, meatloaf, and pot roast dinners. By 1960, there were 8 main varieties and dozens of regional specials. In 1962, Swanson introduced a four-compartment tray, a fourth little aluminum hollow for dessert, apple cobbler, cherry crisp, brownie. Suddenly, the meal wasn't just dinner. It was dinner and dessert, all in one piece of engineered tin. The four-compartment tray is an underappreciated moment in American cultural history. It was the tray admitting that one plate was a whole experience, a complete narrative. Start with peas, end with cobbler, and don't get up for 25 minutes. And of course, competitors smelled the money. They came running. Morton Foods launched its competing line of frozen dinners in the mid-1950s, positioning itself as a value alternative. Where Swanson sold itself as modern and scientific, Morton sold itself as affordable and filling. Banquet Foods came next, and Banquet went even lower on price. A Banquet TV dinner in the 1960s could cost as little as 39 cents, less than half what a Swanson cost. The trade-off was obvious to anyone who ate one. The portions were smaller, the turkey was more ambiguous. The gravy had the texture of wallpaper paste. But for a family of 6 trying to stretch a Friday paycheck, Banquet was a miracle. It was hot food on a plate for less than you could cook it yourself. Stouffer's went the opposite direction. Stouffer's had been a restaurant chain in Cleveland since 1924, and in the 1950s, the family pivoted toward frozen versions of their restaurant meals. Instead of competing on price, they competed on quality. Stouffer's frozen spinach soufflé, lasagna, macaroni, and cheese. These were sold in rectangular paperboard and foil pans, designed to sit on your table without apology. By the late 1960s, Stouffer's had built a brand around the frozen meal as something you didn't have to be embarrassed about serving to guests. So now, by 1970, you had the full-class system of the frozen dinner aisle. Banquet at the bottom, feeding big families on tight budgets. Swanson in the middle, the original, the classic, still carrying the aura of 1953 futurism. Stouffer's at the top, pretending to be a nice restaurant you didn't have to leave the house for. And then came Hungry Man, 1973. Swanson takes a long look at its customer base and notices something. The man of the house, specifically the working-class man, the construction worker, the trucker, the guy who'd just finished a double shift at the steel mill, is eating 2 TV dinners at a sitting, sometimes 3. The standard tray, built for 1953 appetites, is not keeping up with 1973 stomachs. Swanson's solution is blunt and beautiful. They make a bigger tray, a much bigger tray. They pack it with more meat, fried, chicken, Salisbury steak, chopped sirloin, and they give it a name that doesn't mess around: Hungry Man. The commercials were unsubtle: a deep-voiced narrator, a massive tray of food, a man in a plaid shirt eating with both hands. The tagline, "Hungry Man for the Hungry Man." It was the 1970s distilled into a 14-ounce slab of beef gravy, and it worked. By 1975, Hungry Man was one of the best-selling frozen dinner lines in America. Swanson had figured out something the rest of the industry would copy for the next 40 years. People will pay more for the same food if you make the portion bigger and the packaging more aggressive. Take another breath. Here's where the story turns. The peak of the TV dinner's cultural power was somewhere between 1972 and 1978. Those were the years when, if you walked into an average suburban American supermarket, the frozen food aisle was 20 or 30 feet long, and half of it was TV dinners. Swanson, Morton, Banquet, Stouffer's, Hungry Man, Armour, Patio, Chun King for the Chinese-American versions, chop suey in a compartmented tray, sweet and sour pork with a little plastic pouch of sauce. The freezer doors fogged up from being opened so often. The whole aisle hummed with compressor noise. This was the golden age. Advertisements still used the old futuristic language, space-age convenience, tomorrow's meal today, even though the food itself had settled into a comfortable, unambitious middle age. The peas were still bright green. The gravy still had that specific brown sheen. The apple cobbler still bubbled up through the foil in exactly the same way it had in 1962. Nothing had really changed. That, in a strange way, was the point. The future that had been promised in 1953 had arrived, and the arrival looked like a tray of turkey for $1.25. But here comes the twist that nobody in 1956 saw coming. Percy Spencer. The name doesn't sound like food history, but it is. Percy Spencer was an engineer at Raytheon, the defense contractor, and in 1945, 8 years before the first TV dinner, he was standing in front of an active magnetron, which is the component that generates microwave radiation for radar systems. He had a chocolate bar in his pocket. The chocolate bar melted. Spencer, being the kind of man who pays attention when chocolate melts for no apparent reason, investigated. He held up some popcorn kernels. They popped. He held up an egg. It exploded. Percy Spencer had just invented the microwave oven. Well, he had discovered the principle. The first commercial microwave oven, the Raytheon Radarange, came out in 1947, cost about $3,000, stood nearly 6 feet tall, weighed 750 pounds, and had to be water-cooled. It was not going into anyone's kitchen. For 30 years, the microwave stayed locked out of American homes. Too big, too expensive, too weird. People didn't trust it. The word radiation did not play well with housewives. Through the entire 1950s and 1960s and early 1970s, the golden age of the TV dinner, almost nobody cooked with microwaves at home. And then, slowly, the technology got smaller, cheaper, safer. Countertop models started appearing in the late 1960s. By the mid-1970s, Amana, Litton, Sharp, and Panasonic were selling microwave ovens for under $500. Still a splurge, but doable. In 1971, about 1% of American homes had a microwave. In 1976, about 14%. In 1980, about 25%. And in 1986, this is the year the story pivots. Microwave oven penetration in American homes crossed 50%. That is the year the TV dinner, in its original form, began to die. Here is why. The aluminum tray, the beautiful engineered 3-compartment, foil-lidded icon of American optimism, could not go in a microwave. Aluminum reflects microwaves. Put a foil tray in a microwave and you get sparks. You get arcing. In a bad moment, you get a small fire. The whole design language of the TV dinner, the tray, the foil, the 25 minutes at 425, was oven-based. It was built for a 1953 kitchen with a 1953 range. By 1986, American families didn't want to wait 25 minutes for dinner anymore. They wanted 4 minutes. They wanted to come home from work, drop a tray into a humming white box, push a button, and eat. The oven and foil tray was suddenly, brutally obsolete. The industry scrambled. Swanson reformulated. So did Banquet, Morton, Stouffer's, Hungry Man. The aluminum trays disappeared and were replaced by dark plastic trays made of crystallized polyethylene terephthalate, CPET, which could handle both microwave and oven heat. The foil lids were replaced by plastic films. The 25-minute instructions were replaced by 3 to 6-minute microwave instructions, and the marketing pivoted. Space age was retired. The new word was convenient. Convenience had always been the underlying appeal, but now it was the loud appeal, the only appeal, the entire pitch. Something was lost in that transition. The ritual, for one thing. The foil rip, the specific hiss of steam, the metallic heat of the tray on your thighs as you balanced it on a folding stand. Microwave meals came out in plastic. They cooled faster. They didn't look like a promise from 1956 anymore. They looked like what they were: fuel. By the early 1990s, the TV dinner was no longer the future. It had become, in the particular American way, a symbol of laziness, of single people eating alone, of kids whose parents were working 2 jobs. Late-night comedians made TV dinner jokes. Sitcoms used them as shorthand for sadness. The same tray that had represented the miracle of post-war abundance now represented something closer to defeat. The big brands consolidated. Swanson, still owned by Campbell, was eventually spun off. Banquet was bought and sold several times, landing with Conagra. Stouffer's went to Nestlé in 1973 and stayed there. Hungry Man kept shouting into the 1990s and 2000s with ever larger portions. 16 ounces, 18 ounces, a 1-pound tray that looked like it had been assembled by a very hungry giant. The TV dinner as a cultural force, though, the thing that was called the meal of tomorrow. That thing was quietly buried by the microwave, by the 2-income household, by the rise of drive-through windows, and eventually by something nobody in 1953 could have named. Which brings us to the closing and the surprise. Because here is where the story loops back on itself in a way that Jerry Thomas, or Clark and Gilbert Swanson, would have found funny. DoorDash, Uber Eats, Grubhub, HelloFresh, Blue Apron, Factor, Freshly, every app on your phone that lets you order a hot meal delivered to your door in 30 minutes. Every meal kit box that shows up on your porch with pre-portioned ingredients and a laminated recipe card. Every frozen Trader Joe's entree that you rip open and heat in 4 minutes flat. All of them, every single one, they are the TV dinner's grandchildren. The TV dinner in 1953 made 3 promises, and those promises are exactly the promises the 2020s food economy is still making. Promise 1, you should not have to cook to eat well. Promise 2, dinner should arrive, not be made. Promise 3, the kitchen is an obstacle, not a destination. Those are Jerry Thomas's promises. Those are Clark Swanson's promises. Those are the 520,000-pound turkey surplus promises. And they have been compounding, unbroken, for over 70 years. Popular mechanics called it the meal of tomorrow. They were wrong about the mechanics. The foil tray is gone. The 425-degree oven is gone. The 25-minute wait is gone. They were wrong about the look of it. They were wrong about the aesthetics. They were wrong about the space-age branding, the atomic kitchen, the rocket ship marketing language. But they were right about the thing underneath the thing. They were right that Americans would, over the next 70 years, slowly and steadily, trade the labor of cooking for the convenience of a package. They were right that the kitchen would shrink and the freezer would grow. They were right that a whole economy would emerge to prepare food for you, to deliver it, to hand it to you in a compartmented container. They were right that the future of food was a tray. The tray has changed shape. It's a cardboard clamshell now, or a paper pulp bowl, or a little plastic box with a peel-off film. But it is still, recognizably, the same idea. Someone else cooks. You heat, you eat. You don't wash a pan. And so the TV dinner, that strange, glowing, 98-cent piece of prophecy from 1953, didn't fail. It won. It won so completely that we stopped noticing. It won so completely that we forgot it was ever a prediction. The future kept arriving, kept looping back, kept showing up, in new packaging with new names, but always carrying the same basic bargain: your time for our tray. Somewhere, in a warehouse in a city you've never been to, a conveyor belt is running. On that belt are thousands of little containers. Some have chicken, some have rice, some have peas. Still the exact fluorescent green that Swanson's food technicians engineered in 1953. The meal of tomorrow is on its way to your door right now. Popular Mechanics was right. They were just early. And Jerry Thomas, wherever he is probably smiling. Because whether or not he drew the first tray on an airplane napkin, whether or not the Swanson brothers deserve more credit than history gave them, he understood something in 1953 that took the rest of us 70 years to catch up to. He understood that Americans don't really want dinner. They want dinner to happen to them. Pull the folding tray stand out of the closet. The future is still being served.